Well, hello, and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I am George. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about a project that has been sitting on my table for months. Now, it sounds like this might be a really long time for a project, and it is, but I haven't been working on it for months. It's been almost finished for most of that time. I just kind of lost interest, and that happens sometimes. There's lots of stuff to do, there's lots of work, lots of personal stuff, but it's been sitting on my desk, bothering me every time I look at it, so I finally decided it is time to get it done. And I did. Let's take a look at Space Marine Heroes Series 1. So I got these models quite a while ago, and they've been sitting in my pile of shame. And a few months ago, I decided, you know what, let's go ahead and start painting them, because I got the Space Marine Heroes version 2, the second series or whatever. Turns out they were exactly the same. It's a reprint. It was not something that Games Workshop talked a lot about, but apparently wasn't something that they hid either. It's just, I didn't read all the stuff about them. It was a little bit of a bummer to discover that the Series 2 was exactly like the Series 1. The only difference was there were fewer models and they used red plastic. Kind of a bummer. But I decided, you know what, let's paint them anyway. Let's make them look pretty decent. And I had what I thought was a pretty cool idea of how to paint these up as something special, something different from my other Space Marines. I mean, they're heroes, right? They deserve to look a little bit different from all the other Space Marines I have. And the very first step in making these models stand out was to add a little bit of flair to them. You see, the Space Marine heroes don't have any insignia of their own. Now, the boxes of models don't even come with any transfer sheets, any decals. So in order to increase the visual interest and probably most importantly, avoid any freehanding of symbols and rank tabs or whatever, I decided it would be a good idea to glue on some of the small plastic bits, specifically on the shoulder pads that say, yes, I am an Ultramarine, I am a Blood Angel, I am a Dark Angel, I am a whatever group that I am. I had little bits of plastic that I could glue onto those pauldrons to make them stand out from each other. You see, my idea was that these were going to be one Space Marine from each chapter, which means I would have a very colorful group of Space Marines, but they would be cool, they would be special, there's something different about them. Why would all of these different Space Marine chapters be in the same spot, right? In my collection, they would be kind of in a little box or what have you. What reason would they have to be in the same place? Well, headcanon. These Space Marines are returning members of the Death Watch. Without going too deep into their lore, basically the Death Watch is an elite collection of Space Marines that have gotten together for the specific purpose of helping out the Inquisition. The Death Watch reaches out to chapters all across the galaxy, and they pick elite members from each of those chapters. They bring them together to go, kill some heretics or some Xenos or some... There's that third thing I forget. Oh yeah, demons probably. I don't know, whatever. So that's why, again, in my head, all of these Space Marines from different chapters across the galaxy are in this one spot. They are returning to their duties as Death Watch. And as long as I was at it, I decided to add just a little insignia. It's the Imperial Inquisition eye somewhere on most of their armor. Not every one of them got them because there wasn't a great place for everyone, but everyone where it made sense, I added a little Imperial Inquisition symbol just to make them stand out a little bit more and to introduce the story in a visual way to my models. To paint the squad, I use a technique I've been working with for the past couple of projects, drybrushing. But it's going to be a little bit different this time because I have a bunch of different colors. I don't have just 12 Space Marines from one chapter. I have 12 Space Marines with 12 different color schemes. Well, at least I thought. So it was a weird combination of batch painting and also, individual model painting. And of course, I always start off with a good, healthy prime. This time I went with the mattest black I could find. It was great, it looks good. And then we move on to the base coat. In this case, we're using dry brushing techniques to get the base coat on the models. Now, because every model is going to have a different color, I have to kind of work with the base coat. What kind of base coat will complement the eventual color of the armor in a way that will establish that color as a shadow, right? So it's going to be a darker version of the eventual color. So, for example, a Blood Angel is going to end up red, but the first base coat, the first most generous layer of dry brush, is going to represent what happens to red when it's in shadow. So I went with a brown, and I went with a brown for a lot of these models, but not for all of them. For models that were going to end up being blue, like Ultramarines, I went with like a dark purple for the initial base coat. So that first layer establishes kind of the darkest version of that color that's also not black, because black is going to still be in there because I'm using dry brushing. So it's going to be black as the very darkest shadow, the initial layer of base coat as the second darkest shadow, and then we introduce the midtone and then eventually some highlights, each applied with a dry brush, each a progressively lighter color. So I end up with shadow, low light, midtone, and highlight. And honestly, that's most of the hard work done right there. Using just a dry brush, I was able to establish the main color of each model, and I wanted to keep the models primarily that color. In most of a model painting, I use a primary, secondary, and a tertiary color. Here, I wanted to stay faithful to the main chapter color. The splashes of color show up on the pauldrons and on some little details here and there, but for the most part, the Black Templar is going to be black, the Ultramarine is going to be blue, and the Blood Angel is going to be red. So, the hard work is done. It took a little bit of time, but it was starting to look pretty decent. But I had to move on to the weapons. Now, the weapons are a special case because I wanted some uniformity across the squad, right? They're different colors, but I want to visually make them a coherent unit. Well, the weapons are a good way of doing that. So they all get the same color weapons. Except that doesn't look very good either, because a red bolter on an Ultramarine looks pretty good. A red bolter on a Blood Angel looks a lot less good. The primary variant is red, and so almost all the Space Marines in this collection have a red bolter, except those for whom it would look bad. Those get like a metallic black. Once I took care of that, all that was left is to pick out all the little details like the pouches, grenades, eye holes, all that kind of good stuff. And I tried to paint these again with a dry brush wherever I could. I couldn't do them all this way, right? I can't see any way of dry brushing the lens color on a Space Marine helmet with a dry brush. It's recessed. It's the opposite of what dry brushing does. But wherever I could, pouches, grenades, that kind of stuff, I made sure that it had that dry brushed look where you can kind of see the streaks of the brush on the paint to make it all kind of look uniform, even if I'm not using the exact same colors on every single one. Now, I did spend a little bit more time than usual on the base, because in this case, it had a special molded base. It's common for characters in Games Workshop range. In this case, it looked like inside somewhere. It didn't look like outside. So no graft tufts. How do I make these bases, A, look the same, like that all the Space Marines are in the same place, but also make them stand out as something special? I know, lava! It took a while to get that done, but it's fairly straightforward. You start off with the brightest of your lava colors. I go with yellow, then I go with orange, then I go with red, and maybe some dry brushing with black to make it ashy. Obviously, each layer that you add, right, red, orange, yellow, you want to add to different parts of the model. So sometimes you're going to have yellow over orange over red. Sometimes it's going to be just orange over red. Other times it'll just be yellow over orange. You kind of vary it to make it look like natural, like a chaotic force. And I think they looked pretty sharp when I was done with them. So the other element that I decided I needed to add in the painting scheme to unify all these different models from different chapters was to stay the same where insignia are concerned. So, if you've done Space Marines from different chapters before, you know that the Aquila on their chest usually is a different color on each chapter. You know, the Raven or the Dragon or whatever is on the pauldron is usually a color that's associated with the chapter. Sometimes it's black, sometimes it's white, sometimes it's green, whatever the case may be. My Space Marines, because they are elite and they're rejoining the Death Watch for another tour, they're gold. These guys are special. So every one of them, their chapter symbol is dry-brushed in gold, as is their Aquila, and other key details on the models, like the trim on the pauldron, also gold. It's non-standard for their chapter, but this is how they get to show off that they are Death Watch, that they are the best of the best of the best. And when it's all said and done, I end up with a model that looks like this. Not too shabby, not amazing, but not too shabby. And, you know, if you don't factor in the amount of time I spent not painting, it wasn't that much time to complete the project. There's the base. There's this red dude who's not a blood angel. He's some kind of red dragon. He's like a custom chapter. I needed something to go with red, and I needed something to go with that little symbol, and so that's what we end up with. Same thing with this sergeant right here. He is some chapter that nobody knows about, or very few people know about, but it's got the shield and a fist on there, so it's not an Imperial fist, but it's some kind of fist, and his armor is white. And he's got all those little dangly bits, and he's even got the caution stripes on his chainsword, because we all know that it's not really a chainsword if it doesn't have hazard stripes. You'll see that this is one of those models with the red weapons, where this was one of the models with the black weapons. But all of them have the golden Aquila and the golden chapter symbol. So, now that these models are done, how do I feel about them? Well, they're okay. Mostly I'm glad that they're done because I'll be able to put them away. You know, to begin with, the models, they weren't really what I was hoping for. They didn't feel as special as I kind of built them up in my head. These are Space Marine heroes, you know, for Pete's sake. They come in their own individual boxes, and they're fine. They're just tactical Marines. They're not bad. They're just tactical Marines in a slightly different pose. That's all there is to it. Any special sauce, you kind of have to add it on your own, which is fine. That's good too. But it felt a little underwhelming. I don't know. It's probably just me. I think my biggest complaint was that they didn't have anything special. There wasn't like any extra ornamentation. There wasn't anything to stick to call these out as special Space Marine heroes. These are just Space Marines. And that maybe took some of the fun out of it. I was able to kind of spruce them up a little bit with some bits and bobs here and there, but now, I don't know. I think I just started off a little bit bummed out about this kit. Add to that the fact that these were eventually going to be reprinted. Yeah, that made me also not feel so great about them. But the final big critique I have for these models is entirely my fault. I had this idea in my head that there were going to be just this range of colors. They were going to be bright. They were going to be varied. It was going to be really cool to look at. It turns out, when you want to use real Space Marine chapters and you want to have their symbols on their pauldrons, it turns out the Space Marines have a lot of chapters whose main color is black. So I ended up with like half of my models ended up from different chapters, but different chapters with black armor. I even have a couple of primarily metallic silver or bronze dudes. They look fine, but it wasn't that colorful thing I had in my head. Had I not attached the chapter symbols to these models, I could have used a wider range of colors that I've never used before. And it turns out that that's what was in my mind. I just didn't know it. I didn't find that out until I was already done with the models. And I knew I messed up. I had a choice to make. start again, remove all the pauldrons, or just accept the fact that that's how that was going to work out. And that's what I did. I didn't want to rip off the pauldrons. I didn't want to have to replace the pauldrons. And quite frankly, at least I can say that these are from, legit Space Marines chapters. They're all in this group, and it fits well with that little narrative I had invented to give these models a reason to be kind of in the same space. They're all Death Watch Marines. They're coming back for another tour of duty. Now, I'm talking about these like they're bad, and they're really not. They're just not exactly what was in my head, but you know what? That's fine. These projects don't always work out the way you thought they were gonna, but that doesn't mean that they're ugly. That just means that you'll have to think about your ideas a little bit more intentionally before you start your very next project. And that, I think, is the biggest takeaway for me, is that I didn't know what I wanted until I eventually finished and figured out that it was not, in fact, what I wanted. I had to go through the entire process to realize that what I was doing wasn't what I wanted to be doing. Yeah, bad news bears for this particular project, but next time I do something like this, I'll have a better idea, and I will have my rainbow squad of Space Marines. Maybe not Space Marines, maybe something. I don't know, whatever. Someday I'll have rainbow Space Marines. Until then, thank you very much for watching. I hope you remember to give yourself some space if you get a little bit burned out in the hobby. Walk away for a little while, come back when you're feeling it, and you'll be in a better mental space, and so will your models. Have a very nice afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.